Perfect, yeah. Hi everyone from my side. First of all, a big thank you to Nativ AI who are hosting us for the second time. I'm so happy to have a SAP Python meetup again in person here on the campus. My talk is a little bit autobiographical about ChatGPT, BART, and quantitative finance. Now you might think, why autobiographical? It's just 6 months ago that ChatGPT entered the scene. I want to set a little bit the stage with regard to my biography here with not my CV, but with what I've written. This is my last published book, Financial Theory of Python. That's 2020, Python for Algorithmic Trading, Artificial Intelligence in Finance, Python for Finance. That's my best-selling one, I can say. Derivatives Analytics with Python, and Listed Volatility and Variance Derivatives. So I have spent, I don't know how many weeks in my life writing books, teaching stuff, trying to master the field of quant finance based on Python applications, right? This is a total of about 2,500 pages. So that as a background, and this might explain a little bit. I also did my PhD here at the university in mathematical finance. So this is another book which would fit the list here. Now, this explains the quant finance. And what do I want to do? In my daily practice, when I'm teaching or we do our own stuff, we use a ton of AI these days for quant finance. But now I want to do quant finance with ChatGPT, with BART. And to make a long story short, to me it feels like it could be my 100% go down to zero in the presence of ChatGPT, but I rather feel that my 100% can now be leveraged to 1,000%. Some people say, and Achim even said, well, I think it's a little bit overhyped. For me, alone the experience from last November now to May 2023 is amazing. What progress ChatGPT, GPT 4.0, now with the plugins, what they have made, what they have accomplished. So I don't want to go into the details themselves. I'm pretty sure not everybody here is well versed or even interested in quant finance. Who has done some finance or a bit of background in finance? Quite a few still. Here we go. What I'm going to show are a couple of examples which fit best, let's say, in my blue book, Derivatives Analytics with Python. All the examples you can find in there, but the examples are by me from a bunch of years ago, and this is now from ChatGPT, unless indicated otherwise, right? First, a mathematics question. Which role does the heat equation play in the Black-Scholes-Merton option pricing model? I'm not going through the text, right? So here's the explanation, and as far as I can tell, I would say that's all correct, right? So we could imagine this written by an expert, by a professor for the students, or in a form of a blog, a book, or whatever, an article. Then I said, well, please provide the mathematical details. And what is provided here is actually also correct. It's not the solution provided, but alone, these days, you can export the markdown that ChatGPT fires out, and this is with proper LaTeX. I had to do just minor changes to accommodate the markdown style of Jupyter Notebook, but overall, it's simply an export, and you get the nicely rendered formulae, which from the story and what is pointed out here is also correct. So you could imagine this being written again by a professor for the students, finding this on slides. Actually, I studied it here with Dr. Schindler. He's now retired. Basically, or probably you can find the very same equations with similar explanations, back then it was in German, in our lecture note there as well, right? So that is the part about mathematics. And when you think of Python applied to quantitative finance, there are a couple of things that you need to learn, that you need to know. It's mathematics, it's finance, it's programming, it's how, if you want to write a book, it's how to write a book, how to organize a topic, how to edit it, how to present stuff, right? There are a couple of skills that I assume, now having written and sold quite a few books, I have somehow acquired over the years, right? And here we see now output in a mathematical domain related to finance, which I would say is pretty good. It took me a while until I would have been able to come up with that. And that's just the starting point, right? Now we get to the next part, and I must emphasize, because this is pretty relevant for ChatGPT that everything that follows is from the same context. Of course, when I interact with ChatGPT, it builds the context and quote unquote it learns, right? So what I'm interested in, how I change my input, etc. The first question was separate. So the first one was simply a one shot, if you like. But what follows now is one single thread from that one until we reach the end here. So here, assume a financial model as in Black-Scholes. Now I go into the details and do a parameterization, a couple of numbers. That's not relevant. Here I provide the resource. I've spent tons of hours with that topic, Longstaff-Schwartz here, with that model, with that paper. And it says, of course, sure, I can certainly help you with that. It spits out the code, provides an example, and that's exactly the value for the Black-Scholes. Well, the only changes that I've made here is that I've changed the 2 here. 2, 3, I don't know why I wanted to just show 2 digits, but in order to judge the accuracy a bit better, I changed here always the 2, 2, 3, but nothing else. 3.844, exactly the value. And this was executable. Simply copy and paste, I could execute it. This is in Jupyter Notebook, exactly how it was spitting the code out. Now you could say, well, this looks also simple, and I would have imagined that. Right, here's the reported value, right? But then I went to BART, right? I wanted to test BART in parallel. Same prompt, the output was, to be honest, pure rubbish. Rubbish. So, and I can show you that. Yeah, I have it still open. I can only, through VPNs, access BART because it's still not available here in Germany, but with a private Gmail account and a VPN, you can work with BART, right? What I like about BART is basically the interface. You always get upfront 3 different options that you can choose from, right? There was not the first draft. I think I reiterated that because the first 3 were rubbish and the second 3 were rubbish as well, right? So I didn't go any further with that. What is nice about BART are the export functions. You can export it to Google Docs. You can copy it, or when you ask it for Python code, you can even open it directly in Google Colab, and if the code would be working, you could execute it in Google Colab. But none of the 6 options did execute at all. So it was a little bit surprising to me. Here, see where I Google it and go further. So I stopped basically considering BART any further. You see the problems here. So math doesn't have any norm CDF. Simply not there. There is norm CDF, which is from scipystats, scipystats.norm. This has the CDF, commutative distribution function, right? So it does it twice. Here, the error. Conceptual error, I was asking for the put option value. On the mathematical side, it's also erring. It's giving here the C value, which is for the call option and not for the put option. Again, this is now finance, right? And the price that it shows, again, conceptual error, it's a negative value. The price of an option can't go negative. That's a very defining factor. So it doesn't know shit about finance. And obviously, from my point of view, about coding as well. There have been other issues with the code, right? So none of the 3 that execute, the code has simple Python errors and conceptual errors. The reported output is theoretically and practically impossible. And all the other Python versions were basically some variant in terms of what it tries to do. Like it used then suddenly norm.ctf, which would be the way to go, right? But it didn't import it and all that stuff. So missing imports, missing here. There are other cases where it tried to come up with a code for the put option with the wrong put call parity and whatnot. So I simply stopped it. That's my take on BART. I might wait like 3 months or 6 months, I don't know, until I test it in that way. So since Achim was talking about Rust, I said, well, I don't know anything about Rust, but ChatGPT, I would guess, knows it, and I'll provide the same solution in Rust. And of course, we get here a Rust version. If this executes or not, I didn't test, so on that machine, I don't have a Rust runtime compiler, right? So, but of course, for any other language, you will find your solution there as well. If this is working as well as with Python, I cannot judge. I don't know, but I just wanted to show that this is not related to pure Python code, right? Now a simulation. Now we are entering a field where numerics and quant finance these days is mostly about numerics and computation, not that much about the equations and the model quants that used to dominate Wall Street back in the days. It's about programming and working with large data sets or doing large simulations. Sure, I can certainly help with that. I mean, this to me it's a little bit annoying, this chat-like style there, right? But it's called ChatGPT after all. The code, correct, and if you have a look at my books, that's exactly the way I would write it down as well. Of course, I've prompted it in a way that it uses my own usual variable names that I only use here in a math finance context, right? When you have a look maybe at my pricing library, of course the namings are PEP 8 conform, etc. Right? And it provides the output, and the SVG file that I was asking for was saved on disk. It could have included it in Jupyter Notebook as well, but it did the trick excellently, right? Explains what is happening. So provide Python code that values now European option based on the simulated path. Of course, we do the same thing. The simulation code was mastered before. Now it knows what I'm asking for. And you see here, I was using short mathematical variable names when I didn't specify the rest here, right? Just ask the general question. It gets started with different variable names, or from style here, different names. The value here, the simulated value, is correct. So the simulation seems correct. This is not, I would say, testing, but after all, if you do evaluation of something and you know the reference value, at least you have some confidence that this might be okay. And now we are getting really involved. So when I started using Python, one of my first problems that I was working on, just started out with Python quite a while back with a paper, Longstaff-Schwartz, should say here, 2001. I spent hours on end not knowing basically anything about Python, nor did I fully understand in the beginning that algorithm. But I asked it first, so for someone who might not know what this is about, what is the algorithm all about? And from my point of view, that's a nice explanation, in particular the emphasis on the backwards step here, which is required for American options when you have the option to early exercise whatever instrument you're trading. Then the implementation of that algorithm that I spent, I don't know how many hours with. Also for my blue book, in that book, the algorithm is at the core for more advanced topics, but nevertheless, this is always the starting point here. And it implements it, I would say, perfectly, right? For style-wise. Again, this is not like a production level code. This is like more book context code, or maybe from a paper, or maybe you'll find it in a blog. You wouldn't deploy it that way probably in production, let's say in a financial institution. But given that I was asking just for the implementation of the algorithm, that's correct. And the price is also, we are talking here about numerical method. When this is different from what is reported in the paper, that's still fine. So we could always go and do more simulations, etc. That's not the point. That's in the ballpark what we would expect for the implementation. But in particular, since it's using linear regression, you could do that with cubic or even higher order regression there as well. So to me, pretty fantastic, right? Having spent so many hours of my life and weeks of my life with that. Then I thought, oh well, let's test another numerical problem. Right here is the Cogsworth-Rubinstein model back from the 70s, like the Black-Scholes model. 200 time steps, that's basically the only input that I have given on top of that. And I also would say this is from an algorithmic point of view, that's a perfect implementation. I could always come up with something that is a bit more concise. So here you see it's still iterating. Everything what we see here could be done fully vectorized, but this is really trickery. This is not getting any performance advantage. This is more that you say, well, I'm a quant finance guy working with NumPy, right? And I don't use loops whatsoever. But if the code is then better readable, that's a completely different question and maintainable maybe in the future. So here, again, the implementation is, I cannot say anything. If this will be an exam question, somebody would type it down, you would say that's a full, it's a fully fledged solution for what was asked for, right? The price of the option. Here, that's the numerical value from the binomial option. That's the real value of the option I was asking for with the other calculations. That's the reference value, actually, if you like, for everything else that was before, because this is not a lower bound, but this is now algorithmic detail. Doesn't really matter. The value is correct, the implementation is correct, and again, I didn't change anything with regard to the code here. So I simply copy and pasted into my Jupyter notebook, and one after the other executed as I was expecting it. And this is even more, first of all, for me, it's absolutely surprising that it can do that, and the more so when I saw what Bart was offering, which was rubbish and nonsense to a pretty large extent. Also the explanations, I'm not going through everything that it writes, but I couldn't find any spot where I was saying something stupid or off point or whatnot. For somebody like a student or what who is interested in that stuff, it might not be enough, but at least there is nothing that is, let's say, wrong or keeping or getting somebody off track. So from my point of view, we have come a long, long way, and I can tell you one thing. When I first used, I don't know, 3 days after it came out, with a free trial, ChatGPT, I asked him similar questions with regard to simulation, etc. It was able already to solve it, but not on the level that we see here. It was using very often pure Python, which is, let's say, here for these applications that are implemented, let's say like 30 times slower roughly, right? What we gain here through vectorization with NumPy is roughly a factor 25 to 35, sometimes 50 times faster than pure Python code. And it was primarily using in the beginning pure Python code, and now to me it feels like it has reached a level there is not that much more to do. Of course, you can always go and use number or use Thyson and implement it differently with static types and use C libraries or whatnot, but that was not the point here. From my point of view, I would say it understands finance, it knows how to explain it, it can implement the code, it knows about the mathematics, it can explain the mathematics, and this is basically what I was saying before. So when I am writing the books or wrote the books so far, I'm now writing another one. This is actually what I think personally, these are skills that I have obtained over, I'm now 50, I started studying at the age of 20 here at the university, so over 30 years I can say, right? And ChatGPT has reached that level, let's say after being 6 months in the outer world. And from my point of view, now being here at the university and also from my role as a teacher in our own certificate program in Python for Finance, coming up with problems is always something that I'm not really, I wouldn't say good at. I don't like to do it simply, right? Come up with exercises, problems, even multiple choice is nothing that I really like to come up with. And this is also where ChatGPT, I think, is pretty good. Breaking down the problem in smaller steps, right? Now it explains here, or I ask it in a way, create small step-by-step problems whose solutions together allow to value the American put option with the binomial option pricing model, right? And then it gets started. Or step 1, understand the parameters and problem setup. Parameters are explained. Our goal is to find Step 2, it's explaining, right? 3, 4, 5. It's like a recipe, right? What I did in my books as well, right? You have an algorithm, and then you have your, in LaTeX, let's say you have your schematic description of that algorithm. This is what ChatGPT is also good at. And now to the questions, right? Create small step-by-step problems in Python with solutions together with the binomial option. Formulate them as exam questions, right? Question 1. Here in that run, so I didn't change it, so I simply pasted it. I didn't tweak that, what I'm presenting here. It presented the solution. So I was asking for exam questions, but basically it's providing now step-by-step the solutions as well, which is also nice, I think, right? And then in the final step, I said, well, right, here we go, now formulate exam-style questions, providing only hints and not the solutions in Python, right? And it did the trick again, and you could go now and copy and paste that into an exam for your students, or maybe in our program for our students, right? I'm recording this, so maybe they will listen to that a little bit later, right? So this is my take on that. So I think this is amazing. It's not changing the world, but it's changing the world for some. In particular, the productivity of people working in such a field, I think, will be increased by not 10%, not 50%, but by hundreds of percent in terms of what they are able to do. Particularly when it's a topic where you have already good grasp, when you now want to enter something where you might not yet be an expert, but you can navigate such fields safely with your background knowledge, this will help a lot. Again, this is not like to judge it overall and to say that this will change the world forever, what many people are talking about. Others say this is nothing reasonable. I just read today a tweet by Nassim Taleb, the author who has for sure sold more books than I have. But he's saying, yeah, but you still need, like the intellectuals and here and there. This is just like reproducing stuff that others have written on the web. That's nothing new. To me, this is amazing, period. This is amazing for my field. And we all know professions like the legal profession, etc., they are, from a financial point of view, really threatened by that. So I feel also maybe to 10% threatened by that with what we do in our program, but to 90% I'm really excited to have such a tool available, which, just imagine, back in the days when I was writing my PhD, would have had something like this. So I don't know how this changes the work style or the life even of people doing their PhD these days, but this is simply a fantastic thing. And on that level, what we have here, this is just a starting point, $20 per month for the Pro tier. That's, from my point of view, excellent. If you're a teacher, I think it's also excellent to structure stuff. I have tested a couple of things, like come up with an outline for a course. 12 sessions are 1 hour, covering X, Y, Z, and it does it in a detailed way when you prompt it correctly. So it's an efficiency gain I haven't seen by any other tool in my whole life. And again, this is just the beginning. Now with the new plugins, there are already hundreds of plugins, also with the browsing capabilities, meaning that I don't know how many of you are using it, probably a lot, but the browsing, now the connection to the web integrated in all of that, and not only the knowledge until 2021. This is really an amazing thing. Yeah, that's basically what I wanted to share with you, and you notice I'm excited. I cannot put it any other way. Thank you. Have any questions? Yeah.
Software engineer at Native. As you mentioned, you're writing a book, and I'm guessing it's finance again. How much ChatGPT will be in your book?
Yeah, it's a good question. I started designing the book, whatever designing means, well before it was published, well before I was working with ChatGPT. So I've done already, I have already available a ton of material. So I never start a book from scratch. So it's usually stuff that I was teaching before. So for example, last year I did a webinar series about reinforcement learning for finance. I did a lecture for our program about reinforcement learning for finance. So for sure, and that's the title of the book, for sure I'm not starting from scratch. Currently, I cannot say how much I will use it for. I have, for example, one topic where I say, well, I don't feel really secure for that, and I prompted it. You don't ask, you prompt these days, right? I prompted it for some code in this regard, and this all looked reasonable. But it's too tempting. Why should I? I mean, it's not an exam situation where you're sitting there, you're not allowed to use a calculator back in the days in the math exam, right? So why not using it? Everybody will be using it. The problem that I see is what I've been doing, I'm pretty sure, given what I was showing and more stuff that I did, that's my take on that the books will be written by the ChatGPTs in the future, because there's just people sitting and doing the right prompts. And if you say, well, we have this target, and they are getting, obviously, and given what researchers say, better at planning, right? It's a good example. If you want to write a book, you usually start with the first word and end with the last word, right? You need to do some planning, what I was saying before. And the last example, which is so clear, right, is when you ask ChatGPT to come up with a joke about X, Y, that. You can only come up with a joke when you know the end, right? Then you get a good joke. You cannot, character by character, come up with a funny joke. Or you just copy it, right? And these planning capabilities, the foresight, the forecastability, right? That's actually what they are getting better and better at. And if you say, well, I'm planning to have a book with like 300 pages, blah, 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 and then you drill it down, I'm pretty sure they will do it then you write books within a day, I would say.
Yeah, I'm just sometimes aware of using ChatGPT because especially if I don't know something, then it could tell you something that sounds great, but it's not the correct solution. And how do you distinguish this?
Absolutely. That's the reason why I was focusing here on quant finance, where I can navigate the field with some confidence, and I'm not a student just trying to enter a field. I mean, they are hallucinating. I mean, this BART example is hallucination, right? It's simply some characters that look like proper Python code applicable to the question, but it's not. One of favorite examples, just try out a prompt with some biography, or provide me a short CV, 500 words about myself, or you put the name in, right? They know about the amazing things that are coming out there. But here it's more like a domain where I can tell. But you're right, of course. If you ask for something and you don't know anything about it, that's dangerous. Yeah.
Do you have an idea about the actual legal situation? Because I can imagine if like people ask the same question, they get the same result and publish that stuff with their own name. And how do you cope with that? I mean, like the most important thing in research, I think that's a very tricky kind of problem.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that one, which I wouldn't consider the biggest problem. The biggest problem I see is, for example, from my point of view, you can imagine how much code I've published in my GitHub repositories, etc. It's all part of ChatGPT. When I'm saying this looks like my code, this could be based, at least to some extent, let's say to 10% could be based, because these are examples, I was the first to publish them, right? And others followed suit in many regards. I'm not saying about everything, but a couple of these things. And maybe ChatGPT uses 10% in this context. Well, what about my copyright, right? What, the copyright of the thousands or millions of others who have published something on the web? This is, I mean, in art, it's always, I mean, if you write something, show me a dog in the style of Salvador Dali. What about that? I mean, this was trained on Salvador Dali, but what about the rights holders of his work, right? That's the big deal. And there will be, I mean, the lawyers are like sitting there, like, getting their knives sharp, right? I mean, their profession is threatened by it, but it will also bring them a ton of business in terms of like litigation and similar processes, right?
I think you should ask ChatGPT to figure out the legal
Yeah,
situation.
the same thing.
Yeah, it can defend itself, right? So. The MacBook in front of the judge, right? Yeah.
So I think nowadays teachers or professors also have the possibility to check whether a text is generated by ChatGPT itself. So it's some kind of tool. So are you going to use the tool on your own text to check if it's recognized, or to which amount, to make sure that other people don't do it maybe?
I mean, I was usually not interested, because I'm sharing content in principle and people use it all over the place. I had a couple of instances where students came over to me and I said, well, you have this fantastic book, but I know this is only 8 weeks into the lecture, and my lecturer was using it without any reference to your book. All the code, slide stuff, math. This guy was fired, actually, because I got to his boss and I said, this is something that I wouldn't tolerate, but if somebody is using something, of course, particularly in China, I've had this so many times. Whole book chapters have been basically copied and pasted, but what do you want to do with a Chinese publisher or an Indian publisher like Pact, which are big in our field? What do they do? They don't care. Do you want to fly down or hire a legal team there? From a technical point of view, I'm not sure. I mean, how could I possibly check whether somebody was using my content? Someone via ChatGPT. I mean, that's kind of the big deal. And I've had discussions hours long last week with a good friend of mine from London. We met and discussed such things. I don't think that it's really that in the end, with these large models, you will be able, or the machines will be able to tell you where it's coming from. Of course, we have two types of AI here. The ones that kind of like go through the web. It's like this app that I use, Perplexity. It always gives you the source of what is telling you, right? But here we have something where 1 billion documents, right, become one, and you have this large language model which in a probabilistic way spits out somehow sensible stuff, right? How will you tell? Therefore I was saying, I don't know whether it could have been 10%, 1%, or maybe 50%. If my question is specific enough, right, I might know that this example is only to be found in my, right, in my book, in that corner, right, niche topic or whatever. But I don't know. I think it's an uncharted territory, right? So there will be, the legal experts are sitting down and the researchers and thinking about it all day long. I try to don't spend too much time on that, but I fully agree that's a big deal. And again, with regard to art, music, etc., it might be a little bit more easy to relate to these topics. With text, I think it might be difficult, because you can even say, write the quant finance book using Python in the style of Edgar Allan Poe, right? That's what ChatGPT can do, right? But how will you ever then somehow relate, right? This is like this filtering and the mashup of so many inputs, what ChatGPT can do, what we probably will never be able to accomplish. Yeah.
Imagine that I am a day trader. How do you think that ChatGPT could be part of my day-to-day operations?
So again, in the beginning, you are...
So imagine that I'm a day trader.
You're a day trader.
Yeah, for example. How do you think that ChatGPT can be incorporated into my day-to-day workflow?
Of course, trading, algorithmic trading is one of our core topics. So first of all, we know ChatGPT, GPT-4 is trained until the end of 2021. So when you want to trade today, it's a little bit difficult, right? In terms of like the news that it might have digested, the view it might have on Apple products, the numbers that might have been relevant during the COVID period, right? I don't know. I mean, of course, I get like these days a few emails per week where people ask via our contact form on the webpage, how can I use ChatGPT to come up with an algorithmic trading bot that I can use on a daily basis? From a technical point of view, pretty sure this is possible. That is, well, I used to be a day trader. I use Bollinger Bands, MACD, and RSI, right, to come up with signals. Do you know how these? Yeah, they are defined that way. There, you would start a prompt. Blah blah blah. How can I implement them based on pandas data frames? Blah, blah, blah. It might show you the original code, or there are packages who do exactly that, right? And then you say, then you go on. It will program you a bot, but you as a day trader sitting in front of it, I currently wouldn't see that really, even with the now browsing option, that you get that much help for your quick minute-to-minute decisions that you might want to take there.
Yeah.
But the coding side for sure, as a coding co-pilot.
So I was thinking more in the direction of using signals other than the indicators that you are talking about. Say, for example, companies release Q statements basically every quarter. Yeah. Do you think that we could use ChatGPT to sort of like analyze these statements and use signals that come from these, let's say, summarizations of these documents in our day-to-day trading? Do you think that it is feasible right now to do that, or does it make even sense to consider this?
Yeah, again, ChatGPT is trained until the end of 2021. So the latest quarterly reports, right, are not internalized.
It's very good at summarizing, right? So if you actually give it a text and you ask it to summarize it, it is pretty good at doing that.
Sure. I do it with books all the time. Give me the 10 key takeaways of book X, Y, that. I fully agree. Yeah.
So do you think that the same thing can be done with financial statement, the quarterly results?
Sure. Yeah. Can be done, but the question then is, what do you do with that? It can be part of a chain, right? I mean, almost everybody since years tries to use sentiment analysis, let's say, of social media or of whatever text. We have also done for Dow Jones a proof of concept where we digested via APIs, socket communication, real-time news from the crypto space and related it in real time with interactive graphics to the Bitcoin price. Back in the days, it's a couple of years back, right? You can do that with, and this can be part of your complete tool chain, but that ChatGPT comes up with something so that you say, well, can you recommend a strategy, let's say a deep learning based strategy, to name one specific thing that will yield me a 2% return with an 80% probability every week, as an example. I'm pretty sure I won't be able to come up with it. Even not when synthesizing everything that it will ever have read or seen. I mean, there are still the armies out there. That's a field that is so competitive. There's hardly any other field that is equally competitive in that sense.
Do you know anything about different languages? So if I don't use English, so I used it just once to try to do French homework for my daughter. Try to judge, but that's still a common language. Do you know anything about the distribution?
German works pretty well. Also, translation-wise, it's better than Google Translate, but the URL is translate.google.com. So what I did, for example, in German, I have let it design a couple of legal documents for my company, like a contract, like whatever, right? It does it out of the box. Where I needed to call and write and pay a lawyer for it. Right? If this is now the best contract in the world, I don't know. If it's not the most important thing, right, life or death, or buying a home or whatever, right, I think I can live with that. And it spits it out, and you copy and paste it, and you have it in a document. So German for me, so far, I didn't do that much in German, but German works fine. And the other languages, I saw many examples in videos where they say, ask it for some Danish version of X, Y, Z, but the people usually say, well, I'm not a native speaker, so I cannot judge the quality, like I did with Rust, right? I can show you it can do Rust programming, but if this is proper code, if this is the right way of doing it, if it's even executing, I didn't tell before. So, but it seems to be pretty good with multiple languages, and this might be also a kind of a, beneficial that it was trained on multiple languages. Now up for beers. All right. Hope to see you soon.